tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Ralph Steele stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the sun paint Seattle's skyline in shades of amber and crimson. At 42, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd seen the worst humanity could offer and emerged stronger. The scar running from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from Kandahar, caught the dying light as he turned toward his desk. Steele Security Solutions had grown from a one-man operation to a multi-million-dollar enterprise in 8 years. What started as basic bodyguard services for tech executives had evolved into comprehensive security consulting for Fortune 500 companies. Ralph's Delta Force background opened doors that remained closed to civilian competitors, and his reputation for results kept them open. The leather chair creaked as he settled behind his mahogany desk, reviewing contracts for the week. 3 new clients, 2 contract renewals, and a government consultation that would net them close to $2 million. Life was good, or so he thought. Working late again, Sharon Steele's voice carried a familiar edge of disapproval as she entered his office. At 35, she remained the stunning brunette he'd married 5 years ago, though something in her green eyes had grown distant lately. Just finishing up, Ralph replied, not looking up from his papers. Christie's recital is tomorrow, right? You forgot. It wasn't a question. Sharon moved to the bar cart, pouring herself a generous glass of wine. She's your stepdaughter, Ralph. She's been practicing for months. Ralph finally looked up, noting how Sharon avoided his gaze. I didn't forget. I'm rearranging meetings to be there. He studied his wife's reflection in the window behind her. Everything all right? You seem tense. I'm fine. The words came too quickly. Just tired. This house, the social obligations, playing the perfect corporate wife, it's exhausting. There was something else, though. Ralph's instincts, honed by years of reading enemy movements and hidden threats, told him Sharon was lying. The way she clutched her wine glass, the slight tremor in her voice, the way she still hadn't met his eyes directly, all red flags he'd ignored for weeks. Why don't you take a vacation? He suggested. Visit your sister in California. Take Christy with you. Sharon's laugh held no warmth. And leave you here with your work? That's all you care about anyway. Before Ralph could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from his brother Roderick. Family dinner Sunday? Bring Sharon. Have something important to discuss. Rod wants us over Sunday, Ralph said, showing Sharon the message. Something flickered across Sharon's face. Panic? Guilt? It was gone so quickly Ralph almost missed it. I might not be able to make it, she said, finishing her wine in one gulp. I promised Christy we'd go shopping. Ralph's suspicions crystallized. In 5 years of marriage, Sharon had never missed a family dinner. She adored Roderick, often saying he was the brother she'd never had. The Steele brothers had always been close, Roderick managing the financial side of the business while Ralph handled operations. Their partnership had been seamless, built on absolute trust. She can come with us, Ralph said carefully, watching Sharon's reaction. No. The response was sharp, desperate. Sharon caught herself, forcing a smile. I mean, she's at that age where family dinners are torture. You go. I'll make it up to Rod later. That night, Ralph lay awake listening to Sharon's breathing beside him. She'd taken a sleeping pill, something she'd started doing recently, but her rest seemed fitful. In the darkness, he made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, while Sharon showered, Ralph activated a discreet app on his phone. One of Steele Security Services was electronic surveillance, and Ralph had access to equipment that would make the NSA jealous. Within minutes, he'd planted virtually undetectable tracking software on Sharon's phone and installed a GPS tracker in her car. Trust, once broken, was like a glass window. Even if repaired, the cracks would always show. Chapter 2. Revelations in Blood. 3 days of surveillance shattered Ralph Steele's world like a sledgehammer through stained glass. Sharon wasn't shopping with Christy or visiting friends. She was spending her afternoons at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, room 1247, with a man Ralph recognized from security footage. The same man who'd been calling her sweetheart and baby in text messages that Ralph's software had intercepted. Vince Love. The name alone made Ralph's jaw clench. Love was a small-time construction contractor who'd bid unsuccessfully on several steel security projects over the past year. Smooth-talking, handsome in a way that probably appealed to bored housewives, and according to Ralph's background check, a man with debts exceeding his assets by considerable margin. But it was the Thursday afternoon revelation that transformed Ralph's cold anger into something far more dangerous. "You sure he suspects nothing?" Vince's voice crackled through the audio feed Ralph had established in Sharon's car. "He's too obsessed with work to notice anything," Sharon replied. "Besides, Roderick says Ralph trusts him completely. The plan will work." Ralph's blood turned to ice. Roderick, his brother, his partner, his best friend since childhood. "When do we move?" Vince asked. "Soon. Roderick's setting everything up. Once Ralph's out of the picture, we'll have control of the company, and you and I can disappear with more money than we ever dreamed of." "And the kid?" Ralph's hand tightened on his phone so hard the screen cracked. "Christy's not Ralph's biological daughter. She'll be taken care of, but she can't stay with us. Too complicated." The casual cruelty in his wife's voice, discussing his stepdaughter like an inconvenient piece of furniture, revealed a woman Ralph had never really known. The loving mother, the devoted wife, the woman who'd sworn to love him until death. All of it had been an elaborate lie. That evening, Ralph sat in his study, a glass of bourbon untouched on the desk beside him. The audio files played through his headphones while he stared at photographs on his desk. Their wedding day, family vacations, Christie's soccer games where he'd been the proudest stepfather in the stands. The study door opened, and Roderick entered without knocking, a privilege Ralph had always granted his younger brother. "Working late again?" Roderick asked, settling into the leather chair across from Ralph's desk. At 38, Roderick had the softer build of a man who fought battles with spreadsheets rather than bullets, but his green eyes, inherited from their mother, had always been warm with genuine affection. Or so Ralph had believed. "Just reviewing some contracts," Ralph replied, studying his brother's face for signs of treachery. "How are things on your end?" "Good. Really good, actually." Roderick leaned forward, excitement animating his features. "I've been working on something that could change everything for us. A major opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" Roderick hesitated, and Ralph saw calculation behind his eyes. "It's complicated. Still working out the details. But Ralph, we're talking about the kind of money that could set us up for life." "We're already set up for life. This is different. This is legacy money, the kind that lasts generations." Ralph nodded slowly, bile rising in his throat. "Sounds interesting. When do I get the details?" "Soon. Very soon." Roderick stood, moving toward the door. "Oh, and Ralph, you might want to update your life insurance. I know you've been putting it off, but with the company growing, why would I need to update my life insurance?" Roderick's smile faltered for just a moment. "Just prudent business planning. You know how it is." After Roderick left, Ralph sat in silence for a long time. Then he opened his laptop and began making plans of his own. If they wanted to play games with his life, he'd show them what a Delta Force operator could do when all the rules were off the table. The first step was simple. Let them think they were winning. Chapter 3. The Trap Springs. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzling, typical for Seattle in October. Ralph dressed carefully, jeans, a casual shirt, nothing that suggested he knew this would be the last normal day of his life. Sharon had already left for her fabricated shopping trip with Christy, though Ralph knew from his tracking that she was actually at Vince Love's apartment. Roderick's house sat on a bluff overlooking Puget Sound, a sprawling modern structure that Ralph's money had helped finance. As he pulled into the circular driveway, Ralph noticed an unfamiliar van parked behind the garage, a detail that sent alarms through his combat trained mind. "Ralph!" Perfect timing. Roderick emerged from the house, his smile too bright, too eager. "Come on in. I've got coffee brewing." The house felt different somehow, charged with nervous energy. Ralph's peripheral vision caught movement upstairs, shadows that shouldn't have been there since Roderick lived alone. "Where's Sharon?" Roderick asked as they entered the kitchen. "Shopping with Christy." Ralph accepted the coffee mug, noting how his brother's hands trembled slightly. She sends her apologies. No problem. Actually, this works out better. Well, I want to discuss. Well, it's business. Ralph nodded, sipping his coffee. The bitter taste had an odd chemical undertone that made his veteran instinct scream. Drugged. He'd been expecting it, had taken stimulants beforehand to counteract whatever they'd use. So what's this opportunity? Ralph asked, pretending not to notice the slight sluggishness creeping into his movements. It's complicated. Roderick's voice seemed to come from a distance. Involves some restructuring of the company ownership. Ralph let his eyelids flutter, allowed his head to nod forward. Restructuring? Don't fight it, Ralph. Just let it happen. Through slitted eyes, Ralph saw Roderick signal toward the stairs. Two men descended, professionals by their movement, probably ex-military like himself. Behind them came Vince Love, grinning like a shark scenting blood. He's out, Vince asked. Give it another minute, Roderick replied. The dose needs to fully take effect. Ralph let his body go completely limp, his breathing deep and regular. The art of playing dead was something every Delta operator learned. Sometimes it was the difference between life and capture. All right, let's move him, one of the men said. They hauled Ralph to his feet, half carrying him toward the garage. Through barely open eyes, he saw them loading him into the back of a sedan. Not the van he'd spotted, which meant they had this planned in detail. The drive took 20 minutes. Ralph counted turns, memorized the route despite the drugs clouding his system. They were heading toward the industrial district, toward the scrapyard owned by one of Roderick's college friends. You sure this will look like an accident? Vince asked from the front seat. Car theft gone wrong, Roderick replied. Ralph surprised the thieves, got knocked unconscious, and they panicked. Dumped the car in the crusher to destroy evidence. Tragic, but these things happen. And afterward, we wait a respectable amount of time. I inherit his share of the company as his only living relative. Sharon gets the life insurance. We split everything 3 ways and disappear. The sedan stopped. Ralph heard metal gates creaking open, the sound of heavy machinery in the distance. They'd arrived at the junkyard. They transferred him to another car, his own BMW. Ralph realized from the familiar leather scent. His hands were zip-tied to the steering wheel, the bonds tight enough to leave marks that would support their theft story. Double-check the restraints, Roderick's voice, muffled now by the car's windows. Ralph remained perfectly still as hands probed the zip ties. His Delta Force training had included escape and evasion techniques that these amateurs couldn't imagine. The ties were tight, but Ralph had dislocated his own thumb in Afghanistan to slip Soviet handcuffs. Plastic restraints were child's play. He's secure, one of the men reported. The car lurched as the crusher's magnetic arm lifted it. Ralph opened his eyes fully now, seeing the massive hydraulic jaws closing around the vehicle. This was his moment, trapped in a death machine with the voices of his betrayers outside. Are you sure he's unconscious? Sharon's voice. His wife had arrived to watch him die. He's gone, Roderick laughed. Now we'll take his company, collect the insurance, and her daughter is next. Ralph smiled in the darkness. They'd just confessed to murder and kidnapping within range of the recording device he'd sewn into his jacket lining. But confession was the least of their worries. As the crusher's roof began to buckle inward, Ralph dislocated his thumb with practiced efficiency and slipped the zip ties. The real game was about to begin, and Ralph Steele, former Delta Force operator, survivor of 3 war zones, and now a very angry dead man, was about to show them what happened when you betrayed a warrior. His next move was survival. After that, retribution. Chapter 4. Resurrection of the Dead. The crusher's hydraulic arm screamed as they compressed the BMW's roof, but Ralph Steele was no longer inside. In the 15 seconds between slipping his restraints and the machine's jaws closing completely, Ralph had kicked out the rear window and rolled through the opening. His Delta Force training kicked in, impact, roll, assess move. He hit the scrap metal pile behind the crusher and burrowed deep, letting the twisted steel and rust-eaten car parts swallow him whole. The machine's death cry echoed across the junkyard as it finished its work, reducing what his enemies believed was his tomb to a cube of compressed metal. It's done, he heard Roderick say from somewhere above. Ralph Steele is officially dead. Ralph remained motionless in his hiding spot, controlling his breathing, ignoring the sharp metal edges cutting through his clothes. Through gaps in the scrap pile, he watched the small group gather around the crusher. Sharon stood close to Vince Love, her hand in his, no longer bothering to hide their relationship. She looked relieved, not grieving, not shocked, relieved that her husband was dead. The woman he'd loved, the woman he'd built a life with, the woman who'd promised to honor him until death. Well, death had certainly parted them. "When do we call it in?" asked one of the men who'd carried him, a thick-set professional with prison tattoos visible on his forearms. "Tomorrow morning," Roderick replied. "I'll report Ralph missing when he doesn't show up for work. Security footage will show him leaving his office alone last night. No connection to any of us." "What about the car?" the second man asked. "Stolen vehicle report goes in tonight," Vince said. "Police will find it eventually, but by then it'll just be another unsolved carjacking." Ralph memorized every face, every voice. The two hired muscle were strangers, but he'd find them. In the digital age, everyone left tracks. "I still think we should have made it look like suicide," Sharon said. "He's been under so much stress lately." Roderick shook his head. "Suicide invalidates the life insurance. This way we get everything clean." They talked for another 10 minutes, dividing up assets like vultures picking over carrion. The company, the house, the investments. Ralph listened to his entire life being parceled out among his murderers. Finally, they left. Ralph waited another hour, motionless as a sniper in a hide, before emerging from the scrap pile. The junkyard was empty except for a security guard who was clearly paid to see nothing. Ralph's reflection in a puddle of oil-tainted water showed a dead man walking. Blood from multiple cuts darkened his clothes. His hair was matted with rust flakes, and his left shoulder ached from the roll through the window. But his eyes burned with a cold fire that would have made his old drill sergeant proud. The first rule of survival: assess your resources. Ralph's wallet, phone, and keys had been left in the BMW, now a metal cube. He had no identification, no money, no way to access his accounts without triggering alerts that would reveal his survival. From the outside, this looked like a catastrophic disadvantage. From the inside, it looked like freedom. He made his way through the industrial district on foot, avoiding main roads and security cameras. Seattle's homeless population provided perfect camouflage. One more dirty, injured man in a city full of them. By dawn, he'd reached a storage unit he'd rented under a false identity years ago. Old habits from his covert operations days had seemed like paranoia then. Now, they were salvation. Inside the climate-controlled unit were 3 bug-out bags, each containing a complete alternate identity: passport, driver's license, credit cards, and cash. There were also weapons: a Glock 19, a combat knife, surveillance equipment, and enough ammunition to fight a small war. Ralph selected the Marcus White identity and sealed the unit. Marcus White had a clean credit history, an apartment in Tacoma, and a background in private security consulting, close enough to Ralph's real experience to be credible. The next stop was a motel outside the city where cash still bought silence. Ralph showered off the blood and grime, tended his wounds with a first aid kit, and began planning phase 2 of his resurrection. His phone, a burner purchased with Marcus White's credit card, buzzed with news alerts. "Prominent Seattle businessman missing," read the headline. Roderick had played his part perfectly, reporting his beloved brother's disappearance with just the right note of concern. Ralph opened his laptop and began digital reconnaissance. Bank records, phone logs, hotel registrations. Information flowed like water when you knew the right channels. Sharon and Vince's affair had left a paper trail stretching back 8 months. The two hired killers were Lonnie Schmidt and Harry Cochran, both ex-cons with violent backgrounds. But the most interesting discovery was a safety deposit box that Roderick had opened just last week. Whatever was inside had required Sharon's signature as a witness. Ralph smiled for the first time since his death. His enemies thought they'd buried their secrets with him. Instead, they'd given him a roadmap to their destruction. The dead man was about to remind the living why Delta Force operators were feared across 3 continents. Chapter 5. Ghost in the Machine. 3 weeks after his death, Ralph Steele had become Seattle's most effective ghost. Operating from a safe house in Tacoma under the Marcus White identity, he'd spent every waking hour studying his enemies like a sniper studies targets. The digital age made surveillance almost too easy. Credit card transactions, cell phone locations, social media posts. His betrayers were living their lives in full view, never suspecting their victim was watching. The evidence Ralph had compiled would have impressed his old intelligence officers. Sharon and Vince's affair traced back to a construction project where Steele Security had outbid Love's company. Rather than accept defeat, Vince had seduced the winner's wife. But what started as revenge sex had evolved into something more dangerous, greed. Roderick's financial records revealed the first crack in the plan. The safety deposit box contained forged documents transferring Ralph's shares in Steele Security to his brother, backdated to appear as though they'd been signed months ago. Legal challenges would take years, and by then the money would be long gone. But Ralph wasn't planning a legal challenge. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message from an old contact. Package delivered. J. Jorge Fulton had served with Ralph in Afghanistan before opening his own discreet services company. No questions asked, no names recorded, no jobs too dark for his particular skill set. The package contained everything Ralph needed to know about Lonnie Schmidt and Harry Cochran. Schmidt lived in a trailer park in Everett, spending his days drinking and his nights dealing meth to supplement his disability payments. Harry Cochran had aspirations. A girlfriend, a legitimate job at a warehouse, dreams of leaving his criminal past behind. Dreams were just another weakness to exploit. Ralph's first move was subtle. Cochran's girlfriend, Christy Hopkins, worked as a waitress at a diner near the warehouse. She was young, pretty, and according to her social media, desperately in love with a man she believed was finally going straight. On a Tuesday morning, Ralph entered the diner wearing construction workers' coveralls and the kind of face that forgot itself the moment you looked away. He ordered coffee, left a generous tip, and waited until Christy stepped outside for her smoke break. "Excuse me, miss?" Ralph approached with perfect working-class deference. "You know Harry Cochran?" Christy's face lit up. "He's my boyfriend." "What?" "Saw him last week with some girl." "Thought you should know." The lie hit like a surgical strike. Ralph watched doubt bloom in Christy's eyes, watched her confidence crumble. He left before she could ask questions, knowing that paranoia was a poison that worked best in isolation. That evening, Cochran's phone exploded with accusatory texts. The argument escalated, voices raised in the thin-walled apartment complex where they lived. By midnight, Harry was sleeping in his car, confused and angry and desperate to prove his innocence. Phase 2 began the next morning. Ralph called Cochran from a spoof number, voice disguised by electronic distortion. "Harry, this is Schmidt. We got a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The Seattle job. Cops are asking questions. Meet me at the usual place in an hour." Ralph knew from surveillance that Cochran and Schmidt rarely met. They were acquaintances, not friends. But fear made people sloppy, and a panicked man didn't question details. The usual place turned out to be a bar in South Seattle, a dive that catered to men who paid in cash and minded their own business. Ralph arrived first, positioning himself with clear sight lines and multiple exits. Old habits died hard. Cochran arrived exactly on time, eyes darting nervously around the dim interior. He was younger than Ralph had expected, maybe 28, with the lean build of someone who'd learned to fight in prison. But Ralph had learned to fight in places where the enemy used mortars and IEDs. "Schmidt's not coming," Ralph said, sliding into the booth across from Cochran. The younger man's hand moved toward his jacket, reaching for a weapon, but stopped when he saw Ralph's eyes. Combat veterans recognized each other instinctively, and Ralph's gaze promised swift, professional violence. "Who are you?" Cochran asked, a dead man with questions. Ralph leaned forward. 3 weeks ago, you helped kill Ralph Steele. I want to know who paid you." Cochran's face went white. "Steele's dead. Saw it myself." "Look again." For a long moment, they stared at each other across the scarred table. Finally, Cochran's shoulders sagged in defeat. It was supposed to be simple, he said. Quick job, good money, no complications. Who hired you? Guy named Roderick. Said his brother was skimming from their company. Needed to be handled quietly. Ralph nodded. Roderick's story would have made sense to hired muscle. Family business, internal justice, nothing personal. Where's Schmidt? Probably drunk somewhere. Look, Mr. Steele, if you're really alive, then you know we were just hired help. This ain't our beef. Ralph studied the man across from him. Cochran had made bad choices, but he wasn't evil, just desperate and stupid. In another life, Ralph might have felt sympathy, but in this life, sympathy was a luxury he couldn't afford. I'm going to give you a choice, Harry, Ralph said quietly. Option 1, you disappear. Tonight, leave Seattle, leave Washington, start over somewhere far away. Never come back. What's option 2? Ralph's smile was colder than the grave he'd crawled out of. There is no option 2. Cochran left the bar with shaking hands and 30 minutes to pack his life into a duffel bag. By dawn, he was on a Greyhound bus heading east, taking Ralph's mercy with him. Lonnie Schmidt wouldn't be so lucky. Chapter 6. The Purge begins. Schmidt's trailer sat at the end of a gravel road like a festering sore on the landscape. Rusted cars and broken appliances littered the yard, while chemical smells from his meth lab drifted through cracked windows. This was where men went to die slowly, one needle at a time. Ralph had been watching for 3 days, learning Schmidt's routines. The man was a creature of habit. Wake up around noon, drink until evening, cook meth until dawn. No visitors except tweakers looking to score, no phone calls except to his dealer. Schmidt had isolated himself so thoroughly that his screams wouldn't reach the nearest neighbor. Perfect. Ralph entered through the back door at 3 a.m., lockpicks making quick work of the cheap hardware. The interior reeked of chemicals, sweat, and decay. Schmidt lay passed out on a stained couch, an empty bottle of whiskey cradled against his chest like a lover. The first splash of ice water brought him around with a gasp. What the? Schmidt's words died when he saw Ralph sitting in the opposite chair, face partially hidden by shadows. Hello, Lonnie. Schmidt's hand moved toward the gun tucked under his cushions, but Ralph's Glock was already aimed at his forehead. I wouldn't, Ralph said conversationally. Your reaction time is probably shot from all the chemicals you've been cooking. Who are you? What do you want? I'm Ralph Steele. 3 weeks ago, you helped murder me. Schmidt's bloodshot eyes widened. That's impossible. You're dead. I saw. You saw a car get crushed. Big difference. Ralph leaned forward. Tell me about the job. I don't know what you're talking about. Ralph fired once, the bullet passing so close to Schmidt's ear that it singed the hair. The sound was deafening in the small space. My name is Ralph Steele, he repeated calmly. I'm a former Delta Force operator with over 200 confirmed kills. I have been tortured by professionals, and I have made hardened terrorists beg for death. You are a washed-up ex-con living in a chemical waste dump. This conversation can go easy or hard, but it will go. Schmidt's bladder released, the acrid smell mixing with the trailer's existing stench. Okay, Jesus. Yes, we did a job. Some guy wanted his brother taken out. Made it look like a carjacking. What got? Never got a real name. Just a phone number and a meeting spot. Paid half up front, half after. Ralph already knew this. Roderick had been careful to maintain plausible deniability. But Schmidt didn't know that. Describe him. Average height, brown hair, expensive suit. Had that soft look, you know? Like he'd never done anything harder than lift a briefcase. What else did he tell you? Just that the target, that you would be at a house in Bellevue on Sunday morning. Said you'd be drugged, easy to move. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong. Ralph nodded. The details matched what he'd overheard in the junkyard. One more question, Lonnie. Do you have any family? Anyone who'd miss you? Schmidt's face crumpled. Please, man. I got a sister in Portland. She's got kids. They don't know about this. He gestured around the squalid trailer. Good, Ralph said, standing. Then she won't have to watch you die. Schmidt started to speak, but Ralph was already moving. The knife appeared in his hand like magic, years of close-quarters combat, making the motion fluid and automatic. One thrust, precisely placed, and Schmidt's word became a gurgle. Ralph cleaned the blade while Schmidt bled out on his stained couch. The meth lab's chemicals would destroy most forensic evidence, and the trailer's isolated location meant the body might not be found for weeks. But Ralph wasn't finished with the scene. He had a message to send. Using Schmidt's own blood, Ralph wrote 4 words on the wall above the couch. The dead remember everything. By dawn, he was back in a coma, monitoring news feeds and police scanners. Schmidt's death wouldn't be discovered for another 2 days, and when it was, the cops would chalk it up to a drug deal gone bad. Just another piece of human trash taking itself out. Ralph felt nothing about the killing. No satisfaction, no guilt, no emotion at all. Schmidt had been a tool used against him, and tools were discarded when their purpose was complete. Now for the real architects of his murder. His phone buzzed with surveillance updates from the tracking devices he placed on Sharon and Vince's vehicles. They were meeting at the Fairmont again, probably celebrating their windfall and planning their escape. They had no idea their hired killers were dead or missing, no sense that their perfect crime was unraveling. That ignorance was about to become terminal. Ralph opened his laptop and began typing orders to Jorge Fulton. Phase 2 of his resurrection required specialized equipment and expert assistance. The ghosts of his past were about to pay a visit to the people who'd killed him. And unlike Hollywood, when these ghosts came calling, there would be no redemption, no last-minute mercy, and no happy endings for anyone but Ralph Steele. Chapter 7. The Haunting Begins. Sharon Steele stood at the window of room 1247, watching Seattle's morning traffic crawl through the rain. The Fairmont Olympic had become their sanctuary, a place where she could be herself instead of playing the grieving widow. The role was exhausting. All those concerned friends, the lawyers handling Ralph's estate, the insurance investigators asking endless questions. "You're thinking too loud," Vince Love said from the bed, his voice still rough with sleep. "The insurance money should clear next week," Sharon replied, not turning around. $2 million, plus Ralph's share of the company, the house, the investments. We'll have enough to disappear completely. And Christy, Sharon's reflection in the window, showed no emotion. She'll go to her grandmother in San Diego. It's better this way. Starting fresh means leaving everything behind. Vince joined her at the window, hands sliding around her waist. No regrets. None. The lie came easily. Sharon had been lying to herself for months about the affair, about the plan, about the kind of person she'd become. One more lie hardly mattered. The hotel room's phone rang, an old-fashioned sound that seemed out of place in their modern conspiracy. Sharon frowned. No one knew they were here. "Let it ring," Vince suggested. But the ringing continued, insistent and somehow ominous. Finally, Sharon answered. "Hello." Silence. Then, very faintly, a voice she recognized. "Sharon? Sharon, can you hear me?" The phone slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers. The voice belonged to her dead husband. "What is it?" Vince asked, but Sharon couldn't speak. The phone lay on the carpet, Ralph's voice still emerging from the speaker. "I know you're there, sweetheart. I know you can hear me. Did you really think death would keep me away?" Vince snatched up the phone. "Who is this? Some kind of sick joke." "Hello, Vince. This is Ralph Steele. I believe you know my wife." Vince's face went white. "That's impossible. You're dead." "Am I? Then how am I talking to you?" Ralph's voice carried a subtle electronic distortion that made it seem to come from beyond the grave. "How do I know you're in room 1247? How do I know Sharon is wearing the red dress I bought her for our anniversary?" Sharon looked down at the dress. She'd worn it deliberately, a private act of rebellion against her dead husband's memory. But no one could have seen her through the window. They were 15 floors up. "This is some kind of trick," Vince said, but his voice shook. "Is it? Check your email, Vince. Both of you." With trembling hands, Sharon opened her phone. A new message waited in her inbox, sent from Ralph's personal account, an account that should have been closed when he died. The subject line read, "From beyond the grave." Inside was a single photograph, Sharon and Vince in bed together, taken from an impossible angle. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the timestamp, taken just 10 minutes ago. "He's watching us," Sharon whispered. "He's here." The hotel room suddenly felt arctic cold. Sharon spun around, expecting to see Ralph's ghost standing behind them, but the room was empty. Yet the feeling of being watched intensified, as if invisible eyes were tracking their every movement. "This is psychological warfare," Vince said, trying to sound rational. "Someone's playing games with us." The phone rang again. This time Vince answered immediately. "What do you want?" "Justice," Ralph replied. "You kill me, Vince. You and my wife and my brother. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? You're dead. We saw your car get crushed. Bodies can be destroyed, but vengeance is eternal. I'm coming for all of you. Every single person who betrayed me will pay." The line went dead. Sharon and Vince stared at each other across the suddenly hostile hotel room. "We need to leave," Sharon said. "Now, get out of Seattle, change our names, disappear. The money hasn't cleared yet." "Forget the money." Sharon was pulling on clothes, her movements frantic. "If Ralph's alive, if he's really alive, then we're all dead. You don't know him like I do. He doesn't forgive. He doesn't forget. And he sure as hell doesn't quit." They were packed and out of the hotel within 20 minutes, abandoning their sanctuary for the uncertain safety of Vince's apartment. But even there, surrounded by familiar walls, the feeling of being watched persisted. Vince's phone buzzed with a text message. "Running won't help." Then Sharon's phone. "I know where you live. I know where you work. I know where Christy goes to school." The mention of her daughter sent Sharon into full panic. She called Christy's school, demanding the girl be picked up immediately. Then she called her mother in San Diego. "Mom, I need you to take Christy for a while. It's an emergency." "What kind of emergency?" Sharon couldn't explain without revealing her crimes. "Just please, I'll send her on the next flight." That evening, they drove Christy to the airport in silence. The teenager sensed something was wrong, but didn't ask questions. She'd learned that adult problems were often beyond her understanding. "When will I see you again?" Christy asked as they reached the security checkpoint. Sharon hugged her daughter fiercely, breathing in the scent of her shampoo. "Soon, baby. I promise." It was another lie. Sharon suspected she'd never see Christy again. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Sharon's phone rang one final time. "Smart move," Ralph's voice said. "The innocent don't deserve to suffer for the sins of the guilty." "What do you want?" Sharon asked. "What I've always wanted. The truth, justice, and maybe a little bit of revenge." The connection ended, leaving Sharon alone with her terror and the growing certainty that her dead husband had become something far more dangerous than the living man she'd betrayed. Chapter 8. Blood and Betrayal. Roderick Steele stood in his brother's former office, surrounded by the trappings of a life cut short. Ralph's diplomas, his military commendations, family photographs, all of it would be boxed up and stored, making room for new management. The company that Ralph had built from nothing would soon belong entirely to Roderick. If only the guilt wasn't eating him alive. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Steele? There's a Detective Williams here to see you." Roderick's stomach clenched. "Send him in." Detective Daniel Hodge was a 20-year veteran with tired eyes and a rumpled suit that had seen better days. He carried himself with the weary competence of a man who'd investigated every sin humanity could devise. "Mr. Steele, thank you for seeing me." Hodge settled into the chair across from Roderick's desk. "I have some questions about your brother's disappearance." "Of course. Anything I can do to help find Ralph." "That's just it. We did find him. Or what's left of him." Hodge opened a folder, revealing crime scene photographs. "A junkyard worker discovered human remains in a crushed vehicle yesterday. Dental records confirm it was your brother." Roderick forced himself to look at the photos, feigning shock and grief. "My God, what happened?" "That's what we're trying to determine. The car was reported stolen the night Ralph disappeared, but the theft report came in after the vehicle was already at the junkyard. Seems like someone wanted us to think it was a carjacking gone wrong." "You think it was something else?" Hodge studied Roderick with the intensity of a man who'd learned to read lies in the micro-expressions of grieving relatives. "Your brother had enemies?" "Business competitors, sure, but nothing that would lead to this." "What about personal enemies? Marital problems? Financial difficulties?" Roderick shook his head. Ralph was solid. Good marriage, successful business. He was living the American dream. The detective made notes, his pen scratching against paper like tiny accusations. We'll need a complete list of his business associates, recent clients, anyone who might have had a grudge. I'll have my assistant compile everything. After Hodge left, Roderick sat alone in the gathering darkness, not bothering to turn on the lights. The guilt was a living thing now, gnawing at his insides like acid. He'd told himself that Ralph would be unconscious when the crusher activated, that his brother wouldn't suffer. But the reality of murder was messier than the fantasy. His phone rang. Roderick Steele. Hello, brother. The voice froze Roderick's blood. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. But he'd have recognized that voice anywhere. Ralph, his older brother, his best friend, his victim. Who is this? Roderick whispered. You know who it is. The question is, how? Roderick's mind raced. Dental records could be faked. Bodies could be planted. His brother had been a professional soldier with connections in dark places. But the alternative, that Ralph had somehow survived the crusher, was equally impossible. The police found your body, Roderick said. Did they? Or did they find what I wanted them to find? Ralph's laugh was cold, mechanical. You always were the smart one, Rod. Figure it out. The line went dead. Roderick stared at his phone, hands shaking uncontrollably. If Ralph was alive, truly alive, then everything had gone wrong. The perfect murder had become a perfect nightmare. His desk phone rang. Security downstairs. Mr. Steele? There's someone here to see you. Says he's your brother. Roderick's throat constricted. What does he look like? Tall, dark hair, scar on his face. He's got ID and everything. Should I send him up? No. The word came out as a strangled scream. Don't let him up. Call the police. Sir, is everything okay? But Roderick was already moving, grabbing his keys and wallet, fleeing toward the emergency stairs. Behind him, the elevator chimed softly as it began its climb to the 15th floor. Roderick burst through the stairwell door into the parking garage, gasping like a drowning man. His Mercedes waited in its reserved spot, a German-engineered sanctuary from the madness upstairs. He fumbled with his keys, dropped them, retrieved them with shaking hands. The car started on the second try. Roderick reversed out of his space, tires squealing against concrete, and headed for the exit ramp. In his rearview mirror, he caught a glimpse of movement, a figure stepping out of the shadows behind the elevator bank. Ralph. It was really Ralph. Roderick floored the accelerator, racing through Seattle's evening traffic like a man possessed. His phone rang constantly, the security desk, the police, Sharon calling in panic. He ignored them all, focused only on putting distance between himself and his resurrected brother. But where could he run? Ralph knew every aspect of his life, every hiding place, every relationship. There was nowhere on earth he could go that his brother wouldn't find him. Roderick's phone buzzed with a text message. Against every instinct he looked. Running away, little brother? Just like when we were kids, and you broke Mom's vase. Remember what happened then? Roderick remembered. Ralph had taken the blame, accepted their father's belt across his back without protest. Their father had never found out the truth, but Ralph had known. Ralph had always known, and he'd protected his younger brother anyway. Not this time. Another text. Meet me at the old house. You know where. Come alone, or Sharon and Vince die tonight. The old house, their childhood home in Bellingham, abandoned since their parents' deaths. Ralph had kept it for sentimental reasons, visiting sometimes when the memories got too strong. It was isolated, surrounded by woods, miles from the nearest neighbor. Perfect for a confrontation between brothers. Perfect for murder. Chapter 9. The Reckoning. The childhood home of the Steele brothers sat like a mausoleum among towering evergreens, its windows dark, its paint peeling with decades of neglect. Ralph had arrived first, as was his custom in hostile territory. He'd swept the perimeter, checked for ambushes, and positioned himself with clear sight lines and multiple escape routes. Old habits died hard. Unlike old brothers, Roderick's Mercedes crunched up the gravel driveway at exactly midnight, headlights cutting through the Pacific Northwest darkness. Ralph watched from the shadows as his younger brother sat in the car for several minutes, gathering courage for what might be his final conversation. When Roderick finally stepped out, He looked like a man walking to his own execution, which, Ralph reflected, was essentially accurate. "I'm here," Roderick called out. "Just like you wanted." Ralph emerged from the tree line, moving with the predatory grace that had made him legendary among his Delta Force unit. In the moonlight, the scar on his face seemed to glow with its own malevolent energy. "Hello, Rod." The two brothers faced each other across the yard where they'd played as children, where they'd fought and laughed and dreamed of futures that would keep them together forever. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. "How?" Roderick asked. "The Crusher, the car. We saw you die. You saw what I wanted you to see." Ralph stepped closer, hands relaxed at his sides. "Did you really think I'd walk into a trap without preparation? I've been planning my own death for years. Exit strategies, escape routes, contingency plans. You gave me the perfect opportunity to use them. But the body, a homeless man, roughly my size, dead from an overdose, dental records altered with a little help from an old friend in military intelligence." Ralph's smile was winter cold. "Amazing what you can accomplish when people think you're dead." Roderick backed toward his car. "This is insane. You're my brother." "Was your brother. The man you betrayed died in that junkyard. I'm something else now. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Sharon, she seduced me. Said you were abusive, that she was afraid of you. I thought I was helping her escape." Ralph's laugh echoed off the abandoned house. "Even now you're lying. To me, to yourself. You wanted what I had, the money, the success, the respect. Sharon was just the excuse." "That's not true, isn't it?" Ralph pulled out his phone, pressed play on audio file. Roderick's own voice emerged from the speaker. "Ralph's always been the golden boy. Perfect soldier, perfect businessman, perfect husband. Just once, I want to be the one on top." The recording was from a conversation with Sharon 6 months ago, captured by surveillance equipment Ralph had placed throughout their lives once he'd suspected the affair. "You've been watching us," Roderick whispered, "for months. I know about the forged documents, the insurance fraud, the plan to kill Christy once the money cleared. Did you really think you could outsmart someone trained in psychological warfare?" Roderick's legs gave out, and he collapsed onto the gravel. "Christy? We never planned to hurt Christy. Sharon did. I have recordings." Ralph crouched down, bringing his face level with his brother's. "She called her an unnecessary complication. Your beloved Sharon was going to have that little girl killed to protect your secret. No, she wouldn't. She would. She will. Unless I stop her." Ralph stood, drawing the Glock from beneath his jacket. The weapon looked enormous in the moonlight, a black hole that seemed to absorb all hope. "Where are they?" Ralph asked. "Who?" "Sharon and Vince. Where are they hiding?" Roderick's training as an accountant hadn't prepared him for interrogation. The location spilled out of him like water from a broken dam. Vince's cabin. Lake Chelan. They're waiting for the insurance money to clear. Ralph nodded. He'd suspected as much. It was the kind of romantic hideaway that would appeal to Sharon's sense of drama. "Thank you," he said, and pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed across the empty landscape like the voice of judgment itself. Roderick Steele, betrayer of blood, thief of trust, co-conspirator and fratricide, slumped forward onto the gravel that had once cradled their childhood games. Ralph felt nothing. No satisfaction, no grief, no sense of completion. His brother had chosen this path the moment he'd decided to play God with Ralph's life. The consequence was always going to be the same. The drive to Lake Chelan took 3 hours through winding mountain roads. Ralph used the time to prepare his equipment, zip ties, duct tape, the combat knife he'd carried through 3 war zones. He also called Jorge Fulton with final instructions for cleaning up the cabin afterward. Some crimes required professional erasure. Vince Love's cabin sat on a bluff overlooking the lake, its windows glowing warmly against the pre-dawn darkness. A romantic retreat for murderous lovers. Ralph could see them through the picture window, Sharon cooking breakfast while Vince read something on his laptop, probably checking their offshore accounts. They looked so normal, so innocent, like any couple enjoying a weekend getaway instead of 2 killers waiting to claim their blood money. Ralph disabled the cabin's power with wire cutters, plunging the interior into darkness. Then he waited, watching through night vision goggles as Sharon and Vince stumbled around looking for flashlights and fuse boxes. The front door wasn't locked. People in love often felt invulnerable. Ralph entered silently, moving through the darkness like the ghost they'd tried to make him. He found them in the kitchen, using a cell phone's flashlight to examine the electrical panel. "Problems?" he asked. Sharon screamed. Vince spun around, reaching for a pistol that wasn't there. Ralph had already relieved him of it during his reconnaissance. "Hello, sweetheart," Ralph said to his wife. "Miss me?" In the phone's weak light, Sharon looked like she'd aged a decade in 3 weeks. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow with sleepless nights and guilty conscience. She'd lost weight, and her hands shook like autumn leaves. "You're dead," she whispered. "You have to be dead. I got better." Vince tried to rush him, but Ralph was ready. A single precise blow to the solar plexus dropped the contractor to his knees, gasping for air that wouldn't come. "Sit," Ralph commanded, and both of them obeyed. Fear was a wonderful equalizer. Ralph zip-tied their hands behind their backs, then dragged 2 chairs into the center of the room. The interrogation position, subjects facing each other, nowhere to hide, forced to watch their partner's reactions to every question. "I want the truth," Ralph said, settling into a third chair like a judge preparing to pass sentence. "All of it, starting with when you decided to kill me." Over the next hour, the full conspiracy spilled out. Sharon's initial seduction of Vince had been accidental. She'd been drunk, lonely, seeking attention her work-obsessed husband couldn't provide. But Vince had seen opportunity in her dissatisfaction. He'd encouraged her complaints, amplified her resentments, until she began to see Ralph as an obstacle rather than a partner. Roderick's involvement had been Vince's idea. Appeal to the younger brother's jealousy, promise him partnership instead of servitude. The forged documents, the insurance policies, the hired killers, all of it orchestrated by a small-time contractor who'd convinced himself he was a criminal mastermind. "And Christy?" Ralph asked. Sharon broke down completely then, sobbing out her plan to have the girl killed in a random mugging 6 months after Ralph's death. Too close to the funeral would look suspicious, but grief made people careless. A grieving mother walking alone at night, her teenage daughter trying to comfort her. Easy targets for street thugs who vanished afterward. Ralph listened to it all with the detached interest of a scientist studying specimens. These people had been parasites, feeding on his life, his success, his love. Now, there were simply problems to be solved. The sun was rising over Lake Chelan when Ralph finished his work. Sharon and Vince Love would be found weeks later, apparent victims of a murder-suicide brought on by guilt over Ralph Steele's death. The evidence would be convincing because Ralph had learned from the best, military intelligence officers who could make reality whatever they needed it to be. As he drove away from the cabin, Ralph felt something he hadn't experienced since the junkyard: peace. The scales were balanced. Justice had been served. The dead could finally rest. His phone rang as he reached the highway. Christy's number. "Hello, sweetheart." "Ralph? Oh God, I've been so scared. Mom put me on a plane to Grandma's house, but she won't tell me why. And then Grandma got a call from the police. They said something happened to Uncle Roderick." "I know, baby. I know. But you're safe now. That's what matters. When can I come home?" Ralph looked out over the mountains, considering his answer. Marcus White had a clean identity, enough money to start over anywhere in the world. There were countries that didn't ask too many questions about a man's past, especially when that past was buried under official death certificates. "Soon," he said. "We're going to start over somewhere new. Just you and me. Would you like that?" "Yes," Christy whispered. "I'd like that very much." Ralph Steele was dead, buried in a junkyard and mourned by no one who mattered. But Marcus White was very much alive, and he had a daughter who needed protecting from the darkness that had consumed her mother. Sometimes the dead got to rise again. Sometimes justice looked like revenge. And sometimes the only way to build a new life was to burn the old one to the ground. Ralph drove toward the sunrise, leaving behind the ashes of betrayal and the silence of the grave. In the rearview mirror, smoke rose from the cabin by the lake, one last ghost ascending to whatever waited beyond. The debt was paid. The account was closed. And somewhere ahead, lay the possibility of redemption. If not for him, then for the innocent girl who still believed in happily ever after. Even dead men could dream. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.